Yep. Okay, all right, lovely. So thank you for introducing me, but I'll just introduce myself again. My name is Anjna, and I'm actually the specialist stroke dietitian at Watford General Hospital. So stroke is a specialty within neurology, and so that's why I've been asked to do this talk today on Parkinson's disease and diet. So I spoke with Ruth, who gave me a few of your questions at the beginning, and that just helped me to understand a little about what it was that you were interested in when it came to diet and Parkinson's disease. So I'm hoping to cover as many of your questions as possible. But as I said earlier, I'm more than welcome for any of you to ask questions throughout or at the end. So if just to outline roughly what we're going to talk about today, we're just going to touch on why diet is so important in Parkinson's disease, the type of diet that should be followed, a diet and how it might affect symptoms within Parkinson's disease, and managing interactions between medications and nutrients in food, which I'm aware is a topic that quite a number of you asked about, and it can be quite difficult to manage medications alongside diet. So we'll go on that towards the end. So a little about why diet is important in Parkinson's disease. People living with Parkinson's are particularly susceptible to weight loss and to malnutrition as the disease progresses. It's one of those diseases which, unfortunately, the symptoms do become more severe over time, and therefore the effect of it can become greater. And so we do often see, as Parkinson's develops, increasing malnutrition and people struggling to keep up with their normal diets. The things that affect this could be things like involuntary movements associated with the medications that you might take for Parkinson's, and this can actually increase your overall energy expenditure, also leading to weight loss. And other things that can affect your diet and your appetite are the disease symptoms, but also the medications. So some medications can make people feel a bit sick or depress the appetite slightly. And again, this leads to limited food intake, and over time that can lead to weight loss and malnutrition also. So I do get asked quite a lot sometimes, what sort of diet should I follow in Parkinson's disease? Is there a specific low protein diet or anything in particular that you should be cutting out? And actually the advice at the moment is that there isn't any one specific diet that should be followed for Parkinson's disease. What we would really recommend is for as long as you can, just to eat a general healthy balanced diet. And this picture here, if you can see that, it sort of depicts what a healthy balanced diet would look like. So we've got our main 5 food groups there. So we've got the fruits and vegetables and the starchy foods, the carbohydrates, and that makes up the bulk of our diet. That's about 2/3 of our diet. And the last third is made up of the protein foods. So you've got your beans, lentils, and pulses, and your dairy foods. And then there's a small, skinny purple section there, which is just for your fats and oils and spreads and things like that, which is also an important part of your diet, but should just make up a small part of your diet. Now, I'm aware that protein section might concern some of you, because one thing that some people are told when they're diagnosed with Parkinson's disease is to avoid or limit protein. But we'll come on to that a bit later on in more detail. But in fact, we would recommend that you do try to eat a good amount of protein if you can. The importance of having a balanced diet is just to optimize your health, and it may improve symptoms such as constipation or low mood, and prevent situations like low bone density or weight changes in the future. So if we just look on the side here, this breaks down what this graphic here is all about. So when it comes to the fruits and vegetables, we would say at least 5 portions and a variety of fruits and vegetables if you can. And this is so that you can optimize your vitamins, your minerals, and also your antioxidants. So fruits and vegetables are very, very rich in antioxidants. And all antioxidants are is they're substances that protect your cells from cell damage. So they're really great. They help to protect against what we call free radicals, which essentially attack our cells. So fruits and vegetables are a great thing to increase in your diet. The starchy foods, the potatoes, bread, rice, pasta, that's the fuel in which our body runs on. So again, it's important that we have a good amount of that. Protein comes from dairy, from pulses, fish, eggs, meat, and then the oils. We do recommend unsaturated oils. So that's vegetables, oils that come from things like nuts, and then foods like avocados, olives, anything with a high fat content that's generally going to be either based in pulses or in vegetables is usually a good source. And those are the types of oils that tend to not reduce our levels of bad cholesterol. And then lastly, just to drink plenty of fluids, at least 6 to 8 glasses a day. So I did touch on this a little earlier, but the diet can play an important role if you do experience adverse symptoms from things like medications or disease progression. And I've just picked out a few main things that are affected, including, your weight loss and malnutrition from being unable to eat as well in the later stages of Parkinson's disease. Issues such as constipation, which is a common issue for some people as Parkinson's disease progresses. And then also swallowing issues, as the muscles in the throat do sometimes start to weaken, and swallowing issues can become quite prevalent also. So again, just touching on malnutrition, it is a state in which the body has a deficiency, an excess, or an imbalance of energy and other nutrients. We do know that people with Parkinson's disease are at higher risk of developing malnutrition compared to the general population. And it can deplete our body not only of weight, but most specifically lean muscle mass. So our muscles are what enable us to remain strong and independent. And really, that's what we're trying to preserve when we're looking at diets in Parkinson's disease. It's trying to preserve that muscle and make sure that we're able to stay as strong and as independent for as long as possible. The loss of lean muscle mass, it can make day-to-day tasks quite difficult. Walking and maintaining balance is one of the things that can become difficult towards the later stages of Parkinson's disease. Therefore, trying to prevent any muscle loss is so important, particularly just after diagnosis and in those early stages after diagnosis. Where possible and where we're able, we do encourage physical activity, and this is just because when muscles are used, they tend to stay strong, but if you don't use them, you lose them. And it's a really important thing that where you can, just to try and keep active. So for all of this, preventing malnutrition is a real key aim for people with Parkinson's disease, just because we want to maintain independence for as long as possible. So often when dietitians see patients with Parkinson's disease and we start to see symptoms like weight loss or lean muscle mass loss, we tend to work through a variety of interventions. And this slide here is just to demonstrate some of the things that we might look at as dietitians. So some of the things that can be affected can be appetite, as I said, through possibly it could be medications, maybe making you feel sick would be an example. And some of the food-based interventions that we would recommend to try to increase the overall energy content and the overall protein content of your meals are just listed at the top under the food-based interventions. So for some people, a large meal can be quite difficult to tolerate, but a little and often meal pattern, just splitting things up into smaller, more manageable portions, can make a big amount of difference and can help you to get through enough food in the day to be able to keep up your energy intake. Fortified meals. So this is a terminology that we use really just to describe adding in high calorie ingredients into your meals. So this could be anything from adding a little bit of extra cream into your drink. It could be adding a bit of extra cheese on top of a meal. And sometimes people get quite creative. And I've had patients before grind up nuts and make a nut powder, and sometimes add that to different desserts, or it could be to milkshake drinks and things like that. And the idea is that you're using high calorie ingredients almost as a form of medicine to optimize your meals if you're not able to have large portions. That way you can get your nourishment in, but just in a much smaller volume. Energy dense snacks. So things like a little bit of cheese and crackers, that could be almost a 200 calorie snack. And if you find that, again, meal times are difficult, splitting up your meals into maybe mini meals and high energy dense snacks can be a good way of getting around the appetite issue. And another useful tip is looking at nourishing fluids. So things like even a plain glass of milk can be useful because it contains lots of good protein. It contains calcium, which is important for your bone density. And sometimes it's easier to drink things than it is to eat a meal or a snack. So one of your snacks, for example, it could be a nourishing fluid, like a milk-based drink or a milkshake or even a smoothie. So those are sort of the interventions that you could do with food, but we also, some of you may be aware of nutritional supplements, which are sometimes used for people when they're struggling to maintain their weight or their appetite. And essentially these are like little milkshakes in a bottle, quite small in their volume, can be between 125 to 200 milliliters, and they've got a high amount of calories and a high amount of protein in them, and are designed again to prevent weight loss and malnutrition. They are generally available on prescription. You can buy them over the counter, but they can be quite expensive. So if you do feel like this is something that would be beneficial, usually going via your GP and having an assessment with a dietitian is one way that they would be available on prescription. And for certain patients in certain situations, artificial nutrition is considered. Its suitability is assessed on a case-by-case basis, but this is just a situation in which nutrition, hydration, and medications could be provided via a feeding tube. Generally, there has to be a medical reason and a need for a feeding tube. So an example would be if somebody was well in all other respects, but just their swallowing was impaired. That may be a justification for a feeding tube being placed. But generally, that is in the more extreme and in the later stages of most conditions. So the next sort of complication, I suppose, or common issue for people with Parkinson's disease is constipation. It is one of the most common problems that we hear about, and it's thought to be caused by damage to the peripheral or central nervous system. So what happens is the nerves are no longer receiving signals as often or as clearly, and this can make the gut a little sluggish. So there are some ways that diet can help to improve symptoms of constipation. One of the main things would be eating a high fiber diet. And the current UK guidelines are that every adult should be aiming for about 30 grams of fiber a day. And this is something that most adults don't tend to achieve. So we have a picture on the side there, which would just give an example of the types of fiber volumes in servings of things like broccoli or an apple. So if we look at the apple, there's about 4.4 grams of fiber. It's not something I would suggest you need to count, but generally, if you have a healthy, balanced diet, if you have lots of fruits and vegetables, if you have things like lentils and beans, and you have whole grain sources of carbohydrate, so whole grain breads, most people are generally on their way towards that 30-gram figure. Drinking more fluid. So fiber and fluid are very important, and they go hand in hand when it comes to constipation. The fiber, it helps to bulk out the stools, and the fluid helps to keep things moving through very nicely. So if you think about a pipe, and if you were to help flush sort of water through it, it just helps to keep things moving through that pipe. And the other thing is exercise, which again can be difficult for people, especially as mobility starts to become more difficult, but just keeping as active as possible, even if it's exercises that you're doing on a chair, perhaps with your hands or your arms. The activity, it just helps the body to keep moving, and it can help to keep or alleviate constipation symptoms. So these are the main three things that could, from a diet perspective or from a health perspective, lifestyle perspective, can help you to alleviate constipation. If you find that it is a persistent issue, you can talk to your GP, as there are medications that can also be prescribed that can also support with this issue. And then the last one was swallowing issues. So a huge percentage of patients with Parkinson's disease may experience swallowing difficulties at one stage of the condition. And swallowing difficulty, the medical term for it is dysphagia. And the situation with dysphagia is that you may not be able to control food and drink as well. And it could lead to something called aspiration, which is essentially that feeling that you get when food's gone down the wrong way. And the reason we want to be particularly mindful and catch any swallowing issues is because when food goes down the wrong way, if you were to aspirate small little particles of food or drink, if it goes into your lungs, you could end up with a bit of a chest infection, and we want to prevent anything like that from happening. So if you do experience any issues like this, please contact your doctor, as they can get you have an assessment done to see if you do have a dysphagia or a swallowing issue. If any of this sounds familiar to you, it may be that you have a slight swallowing difficulty. So if you're coughing on eating or drinking, if you find it difficult to keep food in your mouth, or if you find it hard to swallow, so the food just goes round and round and round. The person that the doctor would most likely refer you to would be a speech and language therapist, and they can give you techniques and exercises which would help to swallow those strengthening muscles, and would maybe help you to sort of get around those difficulties with swallowing. So there are certain techniques that you can put into place which would just help you to control your swallowing a little better. There are also certain food modifications that they may recommend. So for some people, very hard foods might be difficult to control, but slightly softer foods may be easier. So a speech therapist would be able to do that assessment and give you the right recommendations on how to move forward with your eating and drinking. Texture modified diets, so things like, pureed diets or soft diets, they are sometimes not as nutritionally dense because of the fact that they are often more wet or have a higher water content. So with a texture modified diet, we do normally recommend that you just keep an eye on your weight and make sure that your weight is okay, because if not, then you may want to think about seeing a dietitian to help you to implement some of those food fortification and supplements so that you can prevent any malnutrition in the future. So I think this was one of the things that many people had asked me about in the questions that I was sent ahead of time, and it is the interactions between levodopa and protein in the diet. So a lot of the time I do get told, oh, we shouldn't be having protein, or we should be eating a low protein diet, and that's not necessarily the case. Protein is really important because it's one of those nutrients, as I mentioned earlier, that helps you to, it's important for growth and repair. It helps you to fight infections, and it prevents the loss of lean muscle mass. So we don't want to avoid it entirely, but we may just need to adjust how we're taking it and how we're having it in our diet. So The issue with protein and levodopa is that when you eat protein and you have the levodopa at the same time, it can affect the absorption of the medication. If the medication isn't absorbed as well, then you just may not get as strong an effect from it. So maybe your symptoms may be not as well controlled. You may find that you still struggle with things like the dyskinesia, and so that's why we recommend not to have levodopa at the same time as a meal, for example. So instead, what we should be looking to do is redistribute the protein in your diet and try and time the medications so that you don't have them around or with food. The advice at the moment is to take your levodopa 30 to 60 meals before having 30 to 60 minutes before having a meal. And this is the best way to avoid having an interaction. The 30 to 60 minutes works best with the short-acting levodopa because the levodopa is going to be absorbed as quickly as possible. One of the other things that you can do to redistribute the protein in your diet is to reduce the amount of protein that you eat earlier in the day. So, for example, if you were to have most of your medication, in the morning and afternoon, then you may want to have your evening meal as the higher protein meal of your day. The rationale for that is that if you don't take the majority of your protein during your most active hours, when it's most important for the medication to work, and you save it for the end of the day, then if it does have a slight interaction and reduce the absorption of your medication, then it will be more towards the later hours of the day and as you're going to sleep. So hopefully it won't have as much of an impact on your lifestyle. But generally, yes, if you do try to have it sort of 30 to 60 meals before a meal or before a snack, then you should still get a very good response from your levodopa and be able to absorb it without issue. So that's sort of the levodopa in a nutshell. And I think I've just listed at the top here some of the other names that you might know it by. So Cinemets or Dopa, those are the brand names. But the levodopa is the generic name for the medication, just in case you weren't aware. So I'll just let you have a quick look at those. Okay, so I'll just move on now. So these were some of the questions that I had through, and I just wanted to run through them with you to make sure that we had covered them all and to give you an opportunity to ask any further questions. So one of the first things was about the potential interaction. So we did just go through that, but the last part at the end, how would you know if it affects you? So I think you would start to recognize it because upon eating, or you may notice that actually your symptoms start to come back a little bit and they start to become a little bit stronger. And you may find that if you take your medication maybe 2 hours before a meal, you are less symptomatic that day than if you take medications 1 hour before a meal. Everyone's a little bit different and it depends on your disease progression, but playing about with meal times and with your medications is the best way to find what works for you. So the next question was about trying to find a bread with a low GI, but also low in protein. So this was sort of related to what I touched on earlier about not necessarily needing to worry too much about a low protein diet, but more looking at timings of medications and timings of meals. So I would say probably looking at a low protein bread is not something I would necessarily advise, but bread in general is usually quite low protein because it is a carbohydrate based food. So I wouldn't say you need to worry about including bread in your diet. The next question was about what a low Fodmap diet was. So a low Fodmap diet is a diet that is designed for patients who are experiencing gut problems most of the time. So patients with IBS who have food intolerances or are finding that they have maybe loose stools upon eating or just adverse gut reactions to food. A low FODMAP diet is an elimination diet, which helps us to isolate the specific foods that they may be reacting to. It's not a diet that I would recommend for anybody to help control or alleviate any symptoms with Parkinson's disease. And a low FODMAP diet is a very restrictive diet. It's a short-term diet, which is really used to just isolate the foods that you're reacting to. So I would never recommend for somebody to do it on their own. Most of the time, if you feel like a low FODMAP diet is something you'd want to try, I would do it under the supervision of a dietitian or a gastroenterologist, so that you can make sure you're doing it properly. In terms of the supplements that I would recommend for someone with Parkinson's disease, I would say that this would probably be a discussion that you may want to have with your dietitian, as they would be able to recommend the most appropriate supplement if that's something that you feel is recommended for you. We have supplements that have different calorie contents, different protein contents, and also different volumes. So depending on your situation, the dietitian would be able to advise you best on which supplement to take. But generally speaking, most supplements on the market, they are very similar. They all have a high protein and a high energy content. And the idea is that they're supposed to prevent malnutrition. And the next one was just about dietitians. Somebody had sought help from a dietitian to combat weight loss and Parkinson's. And I think sadly, they felt that the dietitian wasn't able to help them very much. So in this situation, I would say that if you have been referred to a dietitian for advice with weight loss and you do have Parkinson's disease, if you are feeling as though the dietitian maybe doesn't have a great deal of knowledge about the medications, the specific medications, the only thing I can say is that I can't speak for other dietitians, but I do know that we have a wide variety of specialisms in dietetics, and different dietitians will know more about certain conditions than others. And it may be that you want to find a dietitian in your local area that is a specialist in either neurology or Parkinson's disease, as they are likely to have more of a broader knowledge of the types of interactions, for example, with your medications and your diet, and also they'll just be able to help you with your dietary advice and tailor it more towards Parkinson's disease. So I'd maybe just look at the specialism of that dietitian. The other is just about protein and how it competes with levodopa for the absorption sites in the gut. And it says that protein should be taken 2 hours after or 2 hours before a medication, and that this can be difficult when you take medication every 3 hours. Okay, so this is an issue to do with the timing of medication and with meals. So I think the advice to take protein 2 hours before or 2 hours after, that's quite a large gap to leave with your meals. So at present, the advice that I'm aware of is that it should be a 30 to 60-minute gap. So it may be that you're able to improve the timing of your meals and your medications just by leaving a 60-minute gap rather than a 2-hour gap. So I would probably suggest maybe trying 60 minutes rather than 2 hours, because it can be then difficult to fit in the levodopa around meals and snacks if you leave larger amounts of time. And so the next question was about protein redistribution in the diet and how this might work with a slow release version of levodopa. So if you are on a medication that is designed to release slowly throughout the day, then having breakfast, lunch, and dinner may affect your response to that medication, perhaps around that mealtime. So what I would suggest is maybe timing the majority of your protein to be towards the last meal of your day may help you to, again, have that maximum window during the day of allowing your medication to work as best as it can. So maybe having your evening meal as your higher protein meal of the day may work best for you if you're on that type of a medication. And it says here, are there other foods which react to Parkinson's medications? So the main food to really be wary of is the protein. And again, it's more not steering away from protein, but just readjusting and redistributing it within your diet. And how can I avoid losing weight when I have dyskinesia? So I think we touched on this just when I went through the diet and malabsorption malnutrition when it comes to Parkinson's disease, and those techniques. So things like having little and often, fortifying your meals, using nourishing drinks. Those are all techniques that you can use to prevent further weight loss when you do have dyskinesia. And if you are struggling with your weight, if you are finding that you're losing weight and you're not able to control or limit this, then I would suggest speaking to your doctor and perhaps getting a referral to a dietitian who may be able to support you a bit further, just in preventing any further weight loss from occurring, and hopefully helping you to gain back some of what you may have lost. So I hope that was helpful. That may have been quite a lot of information, but I'm more than happy to answer any questions now if anybody does have any.
Thank you very much, Anjna. That was very interesting talk. Aubrey, are we able to go back onto the main gallery view now?
Yes.
Brilliant. Excellent. Thank you very much. If anybody wants to raise their hand if they've got a question, but before they do, I've got one. Anjna, so yeah, and just for everybody else's really just information, really, we found that unfortunately with Len, he's one of the people who does get affected by protein, and even though we kept it within the window, he's significantly affected by the protein. Okay. In terms of his walking ability in particular. And we didn't realize this for quite a long time because we were keeping it within the window. We thought, well, there's not much difference when it's in the window, when it's not in the window, so it can't be protein, until we realized when he didn't have any protein at all, that it was much better. But my actual question is, so we're trying to we're trying to redistribute the protein, and we're trying to make sure he has enough protein. So I've read that a healthy individual would require 0.8 grams of protein per kilo of body weight, but that for some older people they might need more than that because they want to maintain their muscles, and because this is an issue in Parkinson's, I want to make sure that we're targeting enough protein. So what sort of target would you say we should aim for?
So I would say that for Parkinson's disease, what we would normally aim for is a similar amount, but we would go up to 1.2 grams of protein per kilo, particularly in Parkinson's disease. If you are elderly, or if you have a much more progressed state of the disease, we would be looking at that higher value of 1.2 grams per kilo. Sometimes for some people, if they are particularly susceptible to muscle wastage or muscle loss, we may even go up to 1.5 grams per kilo. So those are the sorts of figures. So 0.8 is sort of that starting figure for a young healthy individual, but 1.2 to 1.5 grams is where we're looking at when we're trying to prevent any further muscle loss.
Right, okay, that's really helpful. Thank you very much. Has anybody else got any questions? Go on then, Margaret.
Constipation problems. I find that it fluctuates almost from day to day. It can be fine for days, then it can be a problem, then it goes the other way, and there doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason to it. What I eat, what I do, it doesn't seem to matter.
Okay, so it may be that in your situation, again, without knowing you in your specific case, I would just be speculating. But because, as I mentioned earlier, the issue with constipation is thought to be maybe related to nervous system damage. So for that reason, it may just be that day to day things are firing at a different rate, and your body is responding one way one day and another way another day, which is really difficult to manage. And I think the advice that we give when it comes to the fluid and the fiber is really just to put you in the best state possible to be able to avoid constipation. But sadly, the issue is that if things aren't going to be working as well one day, then maybe you may just need a little bit of extra help perhaps that day with a laxative, which might just be able to stimulate that nervous system to start moving a bit better that day. So yeah, the diet is sort of the first line intervention, but there may be some sort of medical interventions such as medication which could help the symptoms day to day as they fluctuate.
Yeah, I have that, yes.
Okay, do you find that helps?
Yeah, yes, sometimes, but there again, it's really peculiar in the sense that you can't rely on anything being, you just think, I've got this sorted when it unsorts itself.
Yes. Oh.
Oh,
I can imagine. Yes.
Any more questions, Amy? Come on, there must be loads. Total quiet.
Hello. Can I ask a question?
Yeah, go on, David.
You talk about a certain level of fluid to be taken in. Does that include teas and coffees?
Yes, it does. Yes. So for your overall fluid intake, that does include teas, coffees, juice, milkshakes, and it does also include food and drink within your oh, I'm so sorry. Oh, my telephone's going off here.
Oh, that's you. I thought it was me.
I will just let it ring out quick. Okay, I'm sorry for that interruption. But yes, it does also include the fluid in your food as well. So if you were to have a soup or a particularly wet meal, that would also be part of your overall fluid intake.
Yeah, because I've been told that too much caffeine is bad for you, and
right.
Can that not caffeine? Can that make you constipated?
Caffeine. Do you know what? I couldn't actually tell you off the top of my head if it is a cause of constipation. I wouldn't have thought it would be, because the fluid would most likely be beneficial in helping you alleviate the constipation. But truly, I've not actually looked at the link between caffeine and constipation. So it's something I'd need to look at.
Thank you.
Okay. Are there any further questions?
This isn't a question, but I've noticed that exercise does play a very large part in coping with my constipation, as well as other things.
Oh, really? Oh, okay, that's really interesting. Yeah, it is.
I go swimming, and on the days when I go swimming, that helps. So I try to swim 2 or 3 times a week.
Oh,
Not
fantastic.
I just manage about 15 to 20 minutes because then I get cold.
Yeah.
But it is quite, and it's a good form of exercise for me because I don't have to concentrate on not falling over.
Oh, absolutely. Swimming is actually a really wonderful form of exercise because it's very gentle on the joints and it works all of your muscles at the same time. So from that point of view of preventing any muscle loss, it's a really great form of exercise. But actually the activity, it really does impact on issues such as constipation. We often notice with our inpatient population here in the hospital that particularly when people have been lying in bed a lot of the day, the bowels, they can start to get sluggish and people do get constipated. So any form of activity is always going to be helpful just in keeping things moving.
My husband just asked me something. He said that he's read that tea and coffee can help prevent dementia. Is that correct? Have you heard anything along those lines?
So I'm not aware of any research with caffeine or tea and coffee in dementia. I have to say that that would be new research to me. It may be the case. I think there's quite a lot of research at the moment going on with the omega-3 fats and dementia prevention. And I believe that's due to the fact that those are the sorts of fats that could help prevent some of the, I'm not sure, I'm getting into all the science of it now, but it could help prevent some of the damage that's happening up in the brain. But I'm not sure about the tea and coffee.
It would be nice if it was true.
Yeah, it would be, wouldn't it? Especially as a tea-loving nation.
Yeah. Any other questions, anybody? Go ahead, you're on mute, Kathy.
On mute. Am I with you? Hello,
That's it.
yes, Kathy here. Yes, good afternoon. Do you have any views on, if you're eating a full nourishing diet, any views on taking supplements such as magnesium or glucosamine or any of these vitamin D tablets? Do you have any views whether they're an advantage or not?
So I suppose it would depend on the supplement that you're taking. So you just mentioned vitamin D there, and vitamin D is a really important supplement for the majority of our UK population to be taking. The reason for that is because we don't get a lot of sunlight in this country, even in the summer months. And that's how we generally make the majority of our vitamin D, is through sunlight and sun exposure. So for most adults in the UK, we are vitamin D deficient and we do need supplementation. So that is definitely something I would recommend for you to have. It's the vitamin D, it's a really important part of bone health, and it works hand in hand with calcium in just making sure our bones remain strong. When it comes to other nutrients, I would say we would have to take it on a case-by-case basis. If you are feeling any symptoms such as tiredness or lethargy, and any nutrient deficiencies were found by your doctor, if they did any blood tests, for example, then there may be a rationale to take some supplementation there. Also, if you were to follow quite a restrictive diet, perhaps maybe if you were a vegetarian and you weren't getting enough vitamin B12, that may be another rationale for some supplementation. But I think the best thing to do would be to go through your diet with your doctor or your dietitian, because they would be able to establish any areas in which you might not be getting enough of one nutrient or another. But on a population scale, it's quite difficult to recommend.
Thank you.
There used to be a specialist neurodietitian based in the Herts Neuro Service. But I've discovered recently that they don't have those specialist neuro dietitians there anymore, and so when we were referred recently to the general dietitians. So you said earlier about it might be beneficial to find a specialist neurodietitian. Do you know where they would be based nowadays, or how do we go about doing that?
Okay, so sadly, I'm not familiar with the Hertfordshire Community Service myself, working in inpatients, but I do know that across the UK, unfortunately, the services do vary very greatly. It does just depend on your area and what has been commissioned and what has been funded as to whether you have, certain specialist dietitians or not. If there isn't anybody in the area and you were looking for a specialist dietitian in neurology, then it may be that you could look online to see if there is anybody running any private clinics. That might be the best and most direct route into seeing a dietitian that has a specialist background. Other than that, I would say the community dietitians within the NHS, if they're aware that you have Parkinson's disease before you're coming to see them, most of them will be doing, they will have educated themselves on a variety of conditions. And if you do have any specific questions, I'm sure they would be able to go away, do some research and help support you also. So we do have the NHS service, but yes, if you were looking for anything specific, it may be that you want to look privately.
I'd like to ask a question. If
Go on, Eric.
when I feel I'm switching off, I also get very bloated. Is there any reason for that? At certain foods, or is it just the effect?
Oh, I'm so sorry, Eric. I just lost you there. Could you repeat that?
Saying often when I'm switching off, I feel I get very bloated at the same time. Is there any reason? Is it food, or is it something to do with something else?
Okay, right. It could be potentially maybe a little bit of constipation and a little bit of maybe that you're slightly feeling. Oh, sorry, there's an echo. It could be that maybe you're feeling a bit bloated because you're constipated. Are you finding that you're able to go to the toilet at that time? And if you're not, then maybe it's just to do with the constipation there. There's many reasons for bloating. And again, I know I keep sort of saying, coming back to it, but often a discussion with your doctor or dietitian would help to establish if it was a particular food causing that issue, for example, or if it is related to your Parkinson's disease, and maybe if there's anything that we could do to kind of get around that issue for you. I'm sorry, I can't really answer that question any better.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
But I suppose it's worth saying that if you find there are issues and you want to have questions, it's worth asking your doctor for a referral to a dietitian to have a discussion about it.
Yeah, I think that the GP, the benefit of going to your GP is that they would be able to look at your symptoms and triage it and refer you to the appropriate service, whether that was a dietitian or whether they felt there was another cause for your issue, and they may refer you to somebody else. So having a discussion with them is probably the best course of action.
Jane, do you want to unmute yourself?
Yeah, just to say, my husband Phil is sat here beside me, was recently referred to a dietitian. It was just a phone call. We didn't go and see her.
Okay. I think that this is something that's been happening a lot more since the pandemic started.
Yes, I appreciate that.
Yeah, I'm currently not aware of what the community services are doing in regards to face-to-face visits versus virtual contacts. I believe that there was a period of time when the COVID-19 cases were reducing, that many of these services were coming back and doing face-to-face appointments. I know it's really difficult doing things virtually, particularly on the telephone. So maybe just speaking with the service and seeing if they're starting to open up clinics and running face-to-face appointments may be worth while, because I don't think telephone appointments are necessarily here to stay forever. I think it's just something in response to the pandemic, as far as I'm aware. But again, working in inpatients, I'm not necessarily sure.
No, it's just not particularly you, but pointed out to the rest of the crowd as well. But you know, this was only about 6 weeks ago or so, and you know, she obviously knew her stuff, but you know, and obviously, like we're saying, not particularly related to Parkinson's either. No. Anyway, just to put them in the picture.
Yeah, it's always worth asking, isn't it, if you can see someone face to face, just in case.
I would just like to say that it is difficult finding a dietitian because they don't fund it. I'm a retired dietitian and I know exactly what happens in the health service. And dietetics doesn't come high on the list, unfortunately. And then another comment I'd like to make just about the experience with low protein diets. They aren't balanced. We used to use a very low protein diet for renal patients. They couldn't keep to it, was malnourished and wasn't doing them any good. So low protein diets are definitely out.
Yes, you're saying they're out, did you say, Francis?
Yes.
Yeah.
They're just not going to do you any good. It was called a Giovanetti diet, and it was 20 grams of protein a day. So you were on low protein bread. It was awful.
Yeah.
Oh goodness, no, I can imagine. Yes, 20 grams would probably not do anybody any good.
That's brilliant, everyone. I've just had a quick question from my husband again. Does protein affect constipation in any way? My husband asked.
No, I wouldn't say so. I think the most important dietary factors that affect constipation would be fluid and fibre within the diet.
Okay, that's brilliant. Has anybody else got a final question? Otherwise, I think we need to wrap it up. Anybody got a final one? No? Okay, then Anjna, just want to thank you very much for taking time out of a busy day to come and speak to us. It's been really, really great.
Oh, absolutely. It's been my pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me.